Hey, ambitious dentist, welcome to Start Your Dental Practice, the show for existing and aspiring dentists to take your dental practice to the highest possible level. I'm your host, Jonathan Van Horn, CPA and ABV, founder of dentistmetrics.com. In every episode, we aim to demystify the how to start a dental practice problem by bringing on world-class dentists, influencers, and consultants in the dental industry to pick their brain about how to get past the barriers involved from going from no practice to being a practice owner to owning your own successful dental practice. As technology continues to transform the dental industry, the world of insurance and credentialing has become increasingly complex. So as a result, dentists are spending more and more of their valuable time trying to figure these things out. And if we're being honest, most dentists don't exactly get excited about dealing with insurance and properly codifying their services. Which is why I'm so excited about today's SYDP guest, Harold Gornbein. Harold is the founder of Apex Reimbursement Specialists, which helps put money back in the dentist's pockets and saves tons of time in the process. With over 20 plus years of dealing with insurance, Harold knows exactly what it takes to give dentists the winning edge. I think you'll enjoy his refreshingly honest take on the world of insurance and negotiation. So here's what you'll learn today. How to get the most reimbursements back from insurance companies, the mistakes most dental practices make that can cost your practice tens of thousands of dollars, the proper way to codify your services and why it's so important, how to put money back into your practice and have it work for you, and the biggest lessons Harold has learned from dealing with insurance for over 20 years, as well as a whole lot more. At the end of the episode, you'll also hear how to get Harold's 5 steps to negotiating PPO's guide. Now please enjoy my interview with Harold Gornbein. Hey guys, sorry for the interruption. Really quick announcement for you. And if you're going to be a dental practice owner, you know you're at some point going to have to get a dental practice loan. Whether it's going to be to acquire a dental practice or it's going to be to start a startup dental practice, you're going to have to get a loan. And I'm really proud to say that a company that I've worked with personally dozens of times over the past few years is our first sponsor after 80 episodes of Start Your Dental Practice. And our first sponsor is Bank of America Practice Solutions. So whenever you're going to be getting a new loan, whenever you're going to get a loan for starting your dental practice or acquiring a dental practice, you really want to make sure that you have 3 things when it comes to that loan. Number 1, you want a really great interest rate. Number 2, you want to make sure that the company that you're speaking with has a lot of experience and can guide you through the best path to be able to become a practice owner through the loan process. And number 3, you want to make sure that the terms associated with that loan are the most advantageous for you. And I'm really happy to say that all 3 of these things, Bank of America just knocks it out of the park for you. And they've got some really great new promotions that I'm not even sure if one of these that they've even announced anywhere else other than what I'm about to say to you on the Start Your Dental Practice podcast. So, SYDPers, here is the announcement for this. So, number 1, interest rates. They've got a couple of really great promotions. The first one is on new acquisitions. The first year of that loan, 1.89% for a dental practice acquisition right now in the first year. That's crazy low. You never even hear of loans dipping below 3%. Nonetheless, less than 2% on that first year. And then after the first year, it's still super competitive compared to everybody else out there because Bank of America always comes in as either the lowest interest rate or one of the lowest interest rates of any banks that are out there. So that's the first part of that. Again, you want to make sure you have a great interest rate. Number 2, you want to make sure that the company you're working with has a lot of dental practice experience. I don't know if any company out there in the world has more dental practice loan financing experience than Bank of America does. They're fantastic at it. Their reps are really good, and they're going to be able to tell you if the deal is going to be able to get done or if it's not going to be able to get done. So they don't waste your time at all, and they can help you understand the different nuances throughout that process. Fantastic. The third piece of this is that the best terms. So here's the really cool part. A lot of people don't realize this, but whenever you are buying a practice or starting a practice up, most banks, if not, 90% of them out there require that you have disability insurance as well as life insurance to cover the payments for that loan, as well as to cover the total value of those loans. This goes up and down quite a bit for different types of loan sizes, as well as different risk profiles for the person receiving the loans. But let's call it $600 a month for those insurance rates. Very, kind of middle of the line for you. $600 a month you have to pay in addition to the loan to be able to have those insurances funded, to be able to have that policy, to have that loan. Bank of America is getting rid of that completely. So you do not have to have that. If you think about that $600 a month, that's $7,200 a year. Over 10 years, that's $72,000 you're going to save by going with Bank of America Practice Solutions. It's really no brainer. If you're going to have to get a loan, which you are going to have to do 100%, you may as well go with a company that has great interest rates, has great experience with the industry, and has the best terms out there in the market today. So if you're currently in the process of shopping loans, 100% give Bank of America Practice Solutions a try. And if you would mention that you came through the SYDP community, it would help out the podcast a lot and also allow us to give back to our very gracious sponsors. Again, this is an advertisement, a paid advertisement. If you go to them, I will, have more advertising revenue come to me. So if you enjoy the podcast, I would appreciate you helping out our sponsors. And if you are interested in that loan process, just text the word bank loan, one word, BANKLOAN, to 33444. Again, that's bank loan to 33444, and we will reach out to you. Thanks, guys. Hello, ambitious dentist. Today, I have with us the wonderful Harold Gornbein. He is a master of an area of dentistry that I am just completely flummoxed by. It feels like this mysterious place inside of dental practices that, to be honest, whenever we first started our company to be outsourced CFOs, back, 4 years ago, which we're not, we no longer provide that service, we sat down and we saw that the area of the subject today is an area that is just incredibly complex. And so Harold is a founder of Apex Reimbursement Specialists, which they specialize in making sure that you guys get to get as much money back from insurance companies as possible. So in today's day and age where insurance reimbursements are consistently falling and you guys are getting squeezed out, Apex is being the good guy and trying to get the ball back into your courts. So they do a lot of things with insurance. They do fee negotiations. They also do credentialing. And they also do help with understanding the coding that is going on inside of your practice so that you are actually coding the things that need to be coded. Harold and I were actually just talking off before the recording about some of the things that we've seen out there in the wild. And, it's almost truth is stranger than fiction sometimes when it comes down to these things. So, Harold, thank you so much for coming on today. I'm really excited about the interview.
Hey, well, we appreciate having me, and hopefully some information that we can that I can share with your listeners, they'll find of value. All of our clients definitely do. We started about 5.5 years ago, and it's been an exciting ride, and love our relationships with our dentists. And to date, they seem very appreciative. One of their pain points is, as you mentioned, is just dealing with insurance companies. So in dealing with them, we're advocates on their behalf, and I'll tell you just as briefly, and then I know there might be some questions that you might have as well, but just a little FYI for you, I spent 20 plus years on the other side of the table working at the insurance companies. So I understand how the actuaries work, how they build their networks, how the fees are set. So that's given me a kind of an insider point of view and a unique perspective to help our clients on this side of the table.
Very interesting. So tell me how you got, you said that you've created the company 5.5 years ago. How did it come about? What made you come and say, hey, there's a lot of confusion in this industry. I know a lot about it. We're going to go out there and help with it.
Yeah, good question. Probably most folks out there listening, have ever heard that sometimes the best things in life happen by accident. and Apex Reimbursement is not any different from that. Myself I was sharing some office space with now my two current partners, Gabi Cohen and Joseph Lefkowitz. We were sharing office space, kind of a small office space. Each one of us had our own business, unrelated to Apex at the time. And even though I was on the insurance side of the world, on the dental insurance in particular, I was running a small employee benefits type brokerage. And then Joseph, who I was sharing the space with, Joseph and Gabi, they were in a type of business where they actually negotiated tax rates and county municipal water fees and things that need to be audited that these types of agencies were charging them incorrectly. So it turns out that it was pretty exciting that Joseph's one of his cousins is a periodontist down in Florida. And just out of the blue, his cousin calls him and says, "Listen, I belong to these insurance networks. I'm unhappy with the fees. Is there anything that you could do? You're a person who negotiates things. Can you help negotiate my fees?" So at the time, Joseph didn't know anything about dental insurance at all, but he knew that my background was in that space. So he comes over to me and he says, "Harold, do you think we can help my cousin?" I say, "You know what? I understand how the networks are built. I understand all the pieces that go into it. Let's make some calls and write some letters, etc." And lo and behold, at the time, again, we had no business. We just figured we'll call pro bono. We'll make some calls on behalf of his cousin and see what we can do. It turns out, and again, it was a pretty high numbers at the time, but when we negotiated for his cousin, we were successful with a few carriers, but one in particular was Cigna at the time. I think we negotiated a 25% increase with them, which is extraordinary. Those numbers are definitely large, and we don't see that every day. But it was pretty exciting to see that kind of improvement. So we looked at each other and we said, maybe we have a business. So that was how it got started.
Very cool. So, when we are talking with doctors going into the startup phase, the acquisition phase, on occasion, they'll make the mistake of asking me about some of these things. So I know the questions. I don't know any of the answers. So I'm going to try and speak from a little bit of the perspective of our listeners. So, whenever someone is either, getting into a practice for the first time, whether it be a startup or an acquisition, as far as the credentialing goes, I mean, how does that process, give me a second grader's education on how that process works, what the timing is, and just educate me a little bit on that.
No, it's a very, very good question. We do work a lot on the credentialing side on behalf of dentists, whether they're a startup or whether they're an existing practice that may be fee-for-service only currently, but they could be losing patients. They're not growing as fast as they once were, and the dentist down the street participates in various PPOs, so their practice is growing. So we see the folks at startup. We see on the credentialing opportunities at startup. We see credentialing opportunities to help a practice grow, but also we see them when a dentist, a young dentist or an associate goes to buy a new practice. They ask our help on the credentialing / transition side. So what does that mean on the credentialing, or what we do for them? What we do for our clients is, we'll call it carrier relationship management and credentialing, is that we do the research to find out which carriers may be a good fit for that dentist in that particular location, that particular zip code. We want to know which carriers can help generate new patients, but also have decent fee schedules, and have a lot of business in that area with the employer groups around that dental practice. So that's part of the research aspect before we actually do the credentialing. Our goal is to try to match a particular provider with insurance networks that make sense for that practice. So that's kind of some of the initial parts of what we do. The actual credentialing piece is, just like in anything, is that there's an application process that each carrier has. They ask for your, educational background. They get a lot of more personal information from their questionnaire, copies of certain licenses, malpractice licenses, all that kind of verification process that needs to take place, and a lot of paperwork that goes involved in that, and a lot of communication that goes along with that with the carriers. We do that on behalf of dentists, and we've got it down to a pretty nice science now as far as what information we gather and preparing that dentist for a smooth credentialing process. So what happens is, from a time frame, after we've actually collected all the information that each carrier wants, and we've gotten a good feel for what each carrier wants nowadays, once we submit the paperwork or the credentialing paperwork on behalf of a dentist to a carrier, a individual dentist should expect roughly about a 30 to 90 day process for that application to take effect. One in particular, Delta, is a little bit longer than most. Delta is closer to about 120, but generally just assume that the process is going to take 30 to 90 days.
Okay.
And when we're engaged on behalf of a dentist, we get calls periodically. What's going on? What's going on? Well, we understand they're anxious, but the reality is we're dealing with insurance companies that don't have the fastest processes in the world and really don't have as much staff as we all think they do. So they do get backed up extensively at certain times of the year, but allow a good 30 to 90 days in that process from start to finish.
Okay, so if you're doing a startup practice, most of the time, that process takes, 6 months to a year to get, from the time you say, I'm going to open a startup practice to the time that you are, opening the doors. That's if you're lucky, obviously. Acquisitions, though, can be a lot faster sometimes. Like we had one that, a dentist had passed away, and the opportunity came up for one of our buyers, and they came in, they bought the practice, and they were in within 25 days. What do you do in those cases? I mean, is there a way for them to be able to use the prior DOTS credentialing or anything like that?
It's a good question, and we often hear sometimes, we're going to, especially if we're brought in very late in the game. And when we say late in the game, we understand acquisitions are happening all the time. And sometimes the credentialing aspect of that acquisition is not necessarily put at the front of the line. It kind of, in their minds, I think it's one of the last things they do. But everybody needs to understand that it's going to take that easy 30 to 90 days for it to take effect for that practice. It doesn't matter if it's an acquisition or startup. The time frame is primarily the same. So if a particular, an individual dentist is aware that, hey, we're going to close on June 15th, just know that we want to understand that the time frame should go back at least 90 days for them to know that they're going to be credentialed by day one when those doors open. The problem, or the misnomer that comes up is, and I think you hit it right on the head, is that, can I just use the current dentist credentialing until I get fully credentialed? And it's a good question, and I think people are kind of confused about that. I'll give you an example of where I've seen this play out. I was presenting at a seminar last year, and one of my topics was credentialing, but just before me was an attorney that was speaking about acquisitions, and also a company that insured various aspects of dental practices. And one of the questions in the crowd said, I don't know about this credentialing. You have to do it that far in advance. I would just use the existing dentist practice that I'm acquiring. And so I look to the dentist, or excuse me, I looked to the insurance company, and I looked to the attorney. Mm-hmm. And I said, I know my answer, but tell me, from my understanding, if you're working under somebody else's credentials, it sounds like insurance fraud, right? And I looked to the attorney, and they said, we wouldn't defend that person if they got audited. And the insurance company to my right said, we wouldn't cover that claim. It was like a malpractice claim or some type of suit that was brought due to that audit. We wouldn't defend it. So I looked to the audience and I said, there's your answer. Always plan in advance. Never assume that you can, and you can't legally assume the credentials of the previous dentist. And it was kind of interesting in that particular crowd, there was a dentist that stood up and said, that happened to me. I acquired a practice. I assumed the credentials until my own credentials were in effect, and we got audited. And they had to pay back some claims, and that she had some issues to deal with. But I don't think we can stress it enough. So when you're speaking to your clients and the dentists that are out there listening, is don't take credentialing for granted. Allow a fair amount of time for that credentialing to be in effect, and do not work under another dentist credential. It'll only come back to bite you if you're audited.
So you touched on a point, and you touched on it really quickly, and it's one of the areas that I feel like people get into this quagmire of issues down the line, is figuring out which insurances to actually take as well. I mean, you made a very succinct point on it, is that, optimally we want to have the insurances that will give us the most new patients as well as give us the best fees. But I mean, how do you even begin to do that type of analysis? Because to me, that just seems that there's to be so overwhelming that because there's so many plans.
You're absolutely right. There are a lot of plans out there, and it's a little bit of a quagmire for dentists that are going to select plans to join the particular plans and which ones to join. Every dentist out there, at least that we meet, they all want the highest fees, which naturally we all want that. We all want to get paid for the work that we do. And we take the approach with credentialing is it's a combination of things. It's a combination of driving new patients, and it's a combination of the fees. And I think the perspective could be unique when different for, let's say, somebody who's a startup, or somebody who's maybe at the midlife of their practice, or even towards the end of the practice. In the startup world, the startup dentist, initially they don't have any patients, but you want to be able to drive patients, and you want to be able to build your practice up. In that respect, we really work hard to try to get them the best fees possible. But there are some carriers that just won't negotiate at point of credential. It's just the facts of life. They just won't. So even though those fees may not be great today, the key in those practices is to drive new patients. So if we've done some research and we find out that large employers in that surrounding that office have a particular carrier that they have their employee benefit plan with, their dental insurance with, but don't have the greatest fees, but because of the proximity they can drive new patients, it's generally a guidance that, hey, listen, we want to grow your practice. You may need to take this particular carrier, even though the fees aren't the greatest, but they're going to help you build your practice. As you build your practice, over a period of time, you can get a little more selective in the carriers that you work with relative to the fees that they offer. And people should know that just because you're looking at a carrier today in that area that those employers might have selected today doesn't mean that's going to be the same carrier that is going to be selected by them a year later or 2 years later. They often change carriers. So in that respect, you have to balance the fees, and you have to balance the access that the new patients that you're gonna gather. What we have found is, let's say you're a startup and we put you with particular recommend certain carriers that have a mixture of good fees and drive new patients down the line, and now it's you're a startup, but now it's 5-10 years later. Your practice is doing great, hopefully, and your chair time, your chair capacity is you're pretty well booked. At that point, we can really evaluate and say, listen, these are the fees that these carriers are paying you. Maybe you should think about, do I really need those patients at that fee level? It could be that you may say to yourself, I'm overbooked. I really don't need to belong to that network because the fees are lower in that network versus what I'm getting elsewhere. At that point, that's really something after an analysis we can help speak to a particular dentist about. But we have found, and Jonathan, I don't know if you found this or other dentists listening out there, is dentists are very important to, they're very important. They play an important role, and the patients really like their dentist. Different than medical. In the world of dentistry, if let's say you don't participate in their insurance company, their insurance plan, you did, but now you don't, but they really liked you, the opportunity is that most likely, I would say probably 50% of the time, they're not going to leave you. So even though you probably still retain about 50% of your patients within that network, and now they're going to see you as an out-of-network, you're still going to retain your patients for the most part and get fees that are more acceptable to you. So it's just something to think about. I've probably given you a long-winded answer to the question, but it's a combination of the balance of fees, the opportunity for patient growth, and then managing that growth and those fees over a period of time to help benefit the practice overall. We definitely don't take a short-term approach. The goal is really a long-term approach to help the practice. I don't know if that answers your question. It could be a long-winded answer to your question.
No, it absolutely helps answer it. You know, I feel like whenever I'm talking to docs and they're at this issue of they're so busy that they're booked out literally a month in advance. Somebody comes in today, they can't get it, they won't be able to get in. If they've got a crown, it's going to be 4.5 weeks before they can actually get back in to get that crown. You know, they're just super busy, and
right.
You know, and they keep doing the same thing over and over and over again. They just keep dealing with it. So, okay, well, we're booked out because that's a great problem to have. But to me, that means there's a lot of opportunity to, you know, to optimize capacity, if you will. Because just because you're booked out in a long time in the future doesn't mean that our days are as productive as they can be. And whenever the provider or the doctor I'm speaking to is very heavily into PPOs, then obviously the question comes up of, you know, are we getting paid the best amount that we can for the people that we're treating every day? Because we obviously have a great practice. We obviously have a great doctor because you're booked out so far into the future. People love you. They want to keep coming to you. But, you know, something's got to give because you're booked out so far in advance. So whenever you come in to help a practice that's in those areas, because I'm sure that's a fairly common descriptor of existing practices that come into you, because they're looking at probably, you know, maybe getting rid of some of their plans or just saying, hey, I'm at the point now that I've got enough work that I can say goodbye to some of these plans. I mean, how do you approach that? Do you worry about negotiations first, or do you use that as leverage for the plans that do negotiate? I mean, can you walk us through that? That's a pretty big question, but.
Yeah, no, it's an excellent question, and the problem you describe is a good one. It's better to be overbooked than underbooked, that's for sure.
Sure.
Except when it comes to the airlines. Excuse me. we don't want to get involved in there, but in the politics with that. But a little different in dentistry versus the airlines. But I think it's a very good point. You have to evaluate. You know, just like in any business, you're always looking at I've got capacity, I'm full, but really, you might be full and you might be even overbooked to a certain degree. You want to have folks in your chair that, one, you know, you appreciate your patients, but you want to get paid fairly for those patients. And assuming that, you know, vast majority of these folks are PPO related, it is a great time to negotiate at that point. We look at negotiating on behalf of our clients every 24 months. So just depending on, you know, when you joined that particular plan, but that's assuming that you've been with that plan for a number of years, I would look at renegotiating them. And we use a lot of extensive analysis, you know, utilization, your UCR schedule, a lot of key data to help create leverage for you with the insurance companies. And I think you touched on a point that's very important, is leverage. It's even, you know, we try to spreadsheet all the carriers that a particular dentist has. You know, most dentists probably have 10 to 15 in that ballpark, and we spreadsheet them, and we do make it known to the various insurance companies to help create leverage against each other. You know, we're aware when we look at something at 20,000 feet, we see the schedules of each of these 10, 15 carriers. It's important to have those numbers in our back pocket because the other insurance companies really don't know wholeheartedly what each other charges.
Sure.
It is competitive, and we do use that data for leverage. So after that whole process of going through the negotiations, finding out which carriers are going to be able to negotiate and try to get the return on these numbers and the investment on behalf of these dentists, we'll do everything we can to represent them and get them great numbers. After that's all said and done, if there's still some carriers that you know just won't negotiate and the fees are just so horrible, and there you want to evaluate and think, well, if I leave the network, how does that impact me? You know, these fees just aren't they're not paying my lab bill. It's whatever aspects of the fees that really aren't supporting their business. We very rarely suggest people leave the networks
Mm-hmm.
because there is some disruption. But there are those times after you evaluate the fees across the board and chair capacity, and evaluating that if I do leave the network, how many of my patients are really going to leave me, right? How many of my patients are they going to stick with me and then end up paying me at an out-of-network level? Our experience says about 50% will stay, so it's a pretty good number. So if you retain 50% of them, the increase of fees, or when they start paying you on an out-of-network level, your practice really is not going to suffer financially. Yet you're going to be able to manage your chair time much better. So
Sure.
it's a constant evaluation, but negotiations play a big part in that. We can kind of weed out the good from the bad.
So whenever you have a practice that that's coming into that says, hey, and I've shared this story actually, so it's a good kind of segue into this. One of our first clients had not changed his UCR, nor had he negotiated any insurance rates in 10 years whenever we brought him on as our client. He was our very first client as an outsourced CFO. And it was one of the very first things we noticed was that, hey, your fee schedules are, you've not changed them in forever, and you've got the same fee schedules from forever ago with every insurance company. And he asked us, can you renegotiate these for us? And we said, we can't because we don't understand what we're looking at.
Right.
But it needs to be done one way or the other. Whenever somebody comes to you with that that situation, what do you guys do? I mean, do you just start looking at, okay, these are the ones he uses the most, or this is the most frequently used plan, so this is the one we need to focus on. And also as a secondary question to that is, does every insurance company negotiate? I mean, is it always a game of I'm going to ask you for more and you're going to give it to me, or is it sometimes they just cross their arms and say, it is what it is?
Yeah, good question. So some of the question is really, do they all negotiate? Which carriers are more apt to negotiate, and do they all negotiate? And when we look at we take on a new client, what is some of the data that we use that's important in trying to negotiate on behalf of that dentist? First and foremost is that not all carriers will negotiate. Some just have a philosophy is that we are the elephant in the room, and we own this market, and we don't negotiate. And there are a couple plans out there across the country that are like that. From our experience, whether you're a $500,000 practice or a $10 million practice, some of those carriers just won't negotiate. So even though we put the effort forth on behalf of our clients, we know in advance they're not going to be successful. And we do a good job of not giving a client false hope. We want to be real transparent. We want to be straightforward. If we look at a client and they come to us and we see that they have about 10 plans that they work with, 10 carriers they work with, odds are we're probably going to be able to negotiate with 5 or 6 of them. And then the others, either they're just too small or not really moving the needle financially, or they're going to be one of those stubborn ones that are going to just fold their arms and say, we're not going to negotiate. But that gives us that quick snapshot when we look at it. And we know in advance, based on our experience, which plans across the country are be more apt to be friendly. But it's not just, knock on the door, can I have a raise? Here you go. Our goal is to give our clients pay raises, that's for sure. But it does take understanding the data that's important to convey the value of this practice to the insurance carrier, and to know which carriers will negotiate, and to know who the right people are in the carriers that will negotiate. Not everybody has the power to negotiate, on behalf of the carrier. Having the relationships within the carrier is also very, very important. But when I speak about data, what are some of the things that we look at? So those folks out there that are running their own practices now, just so that they know what's important to us when we're representing and creating leverage to the carriers. One in particular is your UCR schedule, your cash paying schedule. That is very important. Believe it or not, there are carriers out there that take your cash paying fee schedule into account when they're helping to set your fees. So that's important. And we often, when we speak to dentists, it's amazing how many dentists don't update their cash paying schedule every year. They might say, just like your client said, they haven't touched it for 10 years. Odds are they probably didn't include or increase their cash paying fee schedule either for 10 years. So imagine the amount of inflation, your cost of your business going up over that period of 10 years. Your fees are so far behind the times and so uncompetitive that you're leaving a lot of money on the table. So when we start the negotiation process, one of the first things that we do is, one, we gather the list of carriers they're working with, but we want to see that UCR schedule. We want to know that their cash paying fee schedules are up to date, so that when we're negotiating on their behalf, we're negotiating utilizing numbers that are real today and competitive in today's market. And it's amazing how many we find that just aren't set appropriately as they're leaving money on the table. So the UCR schedule is very important. So again, we recommend updating that every year. Two, one of the key areas is utilization. We always ask, and you probably are aware of this as well, when you're looking at somebody's practice analysis report or production report, probably 25 codes or so represent about 85-90% of the revenue in that practice. So we can go out and try to negotiate and get a new schedule for a client, and the carrier comes back with a schedule that they're so proud of, but when we look at it, we're not so proud of it on behalf of our client, because we look at it and we look at the codes that were increased, but they weren't codes that the dentist is actually using. Mm-hmm. So it's meaningless to give this false impression that they're giving a great increase to a dentist. So we want to know which are the top codes that a dentist uses. Generally, in the general practice dentistry, it's pretty consistent which codes those are, so we have a pretty good handle on that. But sometimes there's some outliers or some unique codes or unique procedures that even a general dentist is doing. But we want to get a copy of that, of their top codes, because that's the area that we're going to focus on with those carriers, because that ultimately is going to make the biggest impact for a practice. So UCR data is important. Utilization data is important. Knowing which carriers that they contract with is obviously important. And then really fourth and fifth is we want to know, is there anything else unique that the practice does? Any procedures that are unique, any unique equipment like a CBCT or any type of equipment that highlights your practice different. Our goal is to create leverage and represent your practice to the greatest ability that we can. We're strong believers that a dental network is nothing without their dentists, and dentists in return also get a lot of patients through the PPO networks. But we try to create a situation where it's a friendly exchange, friendly negotiation, and that each party understands that they need each other to a certain degree. But we do our best to help that network know and help that insurance company know that Dr. Jones on that street corner is important, because all the employers in that area, see Dr. Jones, and he's got this great equipment, and his treatment of care is so great. We convey all that, plus the data, to produce the results that we do. So it's a lot of things that go into it. Hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, it does. And the thing that I've always been somewhat perplexed about is whenever you're doing these negotiations and you're talking to the other end, is it feels almost like a unilateral power. Like it feels like they have all of the power. Or at least I know that's how a lot of my docs feel. Whether that's truth or just a perceived power. So whenever you go in and to talk to them and you lay out these facts like this, are they typically pretty receptive of this, or is this something that, I understand trying to increase certain fees of certain procedures so that you can maximize those negotiations and things like that. But whenever you're talking to the other side, is it always for every client, for the same insurance companies that do negotiate, or is it more of a dependent on, okay, we've got this practice here, and we have no other practices within a 10-mile radius, and so they have more leverage? And is that something you guys are armed with before you go into those negotiations? Again, like I said, I'm completely ignorant to the negotiation process, so I'm just trying to know about as much about it as I can.
It's an excellent question. some of that information is definitely helpful, and I think it does create some additional leverage. Let's say if you're a doctor in the middle of this rural area and there's no other dentist around for miles, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of a unique position where we kind of chomp at the bit a little bit and say, boy, this is going to be exciting because we've got all the leverage potentially on behalf of this client. But those cases are fairly unique and few and far between that they pop up. I will tell you, in general, our experience, again, we've been doing this now 5.5 years and about 750 offices later. Our experience is generally there are a few carriers that are unfriendly, that just feel like these are our fees, this is what it is, take it or leave it. We've got every dentist in town, and if we lose one, that's not the biggest problem. But that's also rare. Our experience is that we try to create a friendly relationship with the carriers. We do various events throughout the country, in our office space as well. We invite carriers. We meet with them. We relay what's important to them, and we convey the message from the dentist to the networks, and really try to understand each side of it. And for the most part, the networks understand that they need dentists. The dentist should be very confident that our experience and the relationships that we've built, that the dentists aren't just a number, and that the networks are important. And keep in mind, these dental insurance companies, everybody's aware that they're in a business to sell dental insurance. And that is 100% true, and that has a dry connotation when you're doing a lot of actuarial numbers and insurance benefits. That kind of stuff is dry, and we all know the human aspect of managing the practice and treating patients. That's also true. But the reality is these companies need to grow their insurance company, and they're out there selling their plans to these employers. But I will tell you, having been on the other side of the fence, being on the insurance company side, I've often been in front of employers, and employers will do what we call a geo-access report. And that geo-access report shows all the dentists in a given area, and it shows the access points for where their employees live. And it's amazing when employees are in certain markets, or certain zip codes that the networks don't have coverage in. At that point, the insurance carrier, for them to be able to sell their insurance plan to that particular employer, they better have a dentist in that area because they need to service their employees. So the insurance networks understand that it's important to have a good network, a large network, to service the people who are holding their insurance policies. So it's not so dry generally. I really feel that they do value the dentist, and they realize that they're not an insurance company and they're not a network without the dentist. So if I was going to send a message to the dentist out there, is be confident in who you are and the role that you play. You're not just a number, and we are representing you in that way as well.
Very interesting. So the last point I want to talk about is arguably, to me, the most interesting as like a stat-based guy, is the coding issue. We talked about before we got on the call. I've had practices that we do benchmarking for our clients. So we benchmark, revenue versus expenses. And since the beginning of my company's existence, we've always wondered, what makes a practice that has 55% overhead versus a practice that has 45% overhead versus a practice that has 70% overhead. What are the real differences in those practices? And we've got great docs, we got great histories in the practices, and for whatever reason, it seems like some practices are more profitable than others. Obviously, the amount of money they're getting paid per service has a big difference in that, but we actually dug into our clients that used business intelligence softwares as well as our own reports. We'd tunnel in and grab out of their data. We found that the type of dentistry that they are doing has a big impact on profitability. When I say the type of dentistry, I'm meaning as in terms of how many crowns did we do compared to how many patients we saw. And whenever we were doing that, we came up, there was a few practices we were noticing, hey, there's these, these buildups that go along with crowns. And we've got practices that aren't even putting any buildups into their system. They're not even putting them in there. And when I talked to those clients, they said, well, the insurance companies don't cover them, so we don't bill for them. And so, and you and I were talking about that beforehand, and that's just a colossal mistake, right? I mean, so the coding side of the things that what you do, I find incredibly interesting. I don't know enough about the content, or the specifics inside of it, but if you would speak to me about how you guys do and how you analyze someone's, mix of services, if you will.
Yeah, it's a good, very good question, and it's kind of a broad topic as well. But generally, how one codes, how we can tell how they code is we get a report, what they call a practice analysis report, and most systems out there should be able to produce that, whether it be Dentrix, Open Dental, EagleSoft, any of those systems out there should be able to produce a report that shows how many procedures were done by each and every code. And from there, you get a good feel for how many unique patients that a particular practice has. So when you have this unique count of patients, then you can start taking a look at national benchmarks as far as, like you said, how many crowns were done in the practice relative to how many buildups. There are some national averages out there for a particular practice okay, if you have 1,000 patients, you should be doing, I don't know, let's say 30 crowns a month in that population. But after you look at the report, a dentist might think, oh, I do 1,000,000 crowns. But when you get a look at the report, you say, oh, the dentist only does 15 crowns a month, and you look at the national average, I'm just making this assumption that there's 30, you go to a dentist and you ask them, what's going on in your practice? What's unique about how you're practicing today that based on your population and based on insurance company data, you really should be doing 30 on average, but you're doing 15. What are you doing? Maybe you're a conservative dentist. Maybe you're looking at trying to save that tooth, and you keep doing the filling over and over again to try to save it versus recognizing at what point you need to put a crown on that. So you're right. The crowns versus buildups is a hot topic, definitely, because they're high dollar. The crown's a high dollar item. So I believe the national average is like a 3-to-1 ratio, 3 crowns versus a buildup. So we saw a report earlier today. If you did 100 crowns and you did 100 buildups, that looks bad. Meaning you could have you could be undercoding or you could be overcoding. If you're overcoding versus the national averages, you might risk the opportunity for an insurance company audit, and nobody really likes that. Audits are always painful and time consuming. But the key in reviewing a practice analysis report is kind of see how you're coding, what type of treatment you're providing relative to the national averages that people are seeing out there. And when you have a third party, kind of an unbiased review of that analysis, it's amazing the unique things that come out of it, the information come out of it. If you're like most dentists, you're just every day, you're just treating the same way every day. You're not really changing things up. You're not looking at things objectively. This is the way you practice. But having a third party look at this report may bring up points that you never thought of. For example, a big area for opportunity within a practice, especially a general practice GP office that has a lot of adults, is the world of perio treatment.
Sure.
According to the Academy of Periodontology, 48% of adults have some level of periodontitis. So if that's the case, and you look at a practice that has 1,000 adults in it, and we look at perio codes that are done maybe 10% of the time. So I would say to the dentist, well, based on the national or based on the periodontology data out there, 48%, 480 of these patients should be receiving some type of perio evaluation. So what that looks like is somebody's coding at code 120 or a code that's a 180. A 180 is a perio eval, and a code 120 is just your standard evaluation. If you have proper documentation, you pick up a perio probe, you actually do the exam, you're entitled to bill and code at a 180. Often, a 180 is good 40-50% higher reimbursement versus a code 120. So that's one little area, and I'll tell you, we had an experience today. I looked at a practice analysis report for a very large practice in Texas, and they had done just over, I think they have 1,300 unique adult patients. And in this practice, the analysis showed that for the ADA 120 code, they had billed or submitted a little over 2,000 times. And this is like one end of the spectrum. When I looked at the code 180, they did it one time. So we asked the doctor, I said, why is that? Knowing that you need to be understanding about perio and the percentages out there, why is that such a stark contrast? Are you not looking for this? So he gave some examples of how they treat, and he recognized that it was an area of opportunity, and he really appreciated bringing it to his attention. And the reason why that is he got in a rut of how he practices and how he does his evaluations, and just assuming, like you said, the insurance company's not going to pay for that code, so why should I submit it? So that was an important, I guess, a piece of information for him that based on those numbers, and the size of his practice, had he had done a perio evaluation and really submitted the code that he was entitled to and appropriately, and he appropriately charted for it, it impacted his practice based on the numbers about $168,000 over 12 months. So that's a huge opportunity for a dentist to take a look at these codes and what they're doing. Another story was an example of a dentist who does mostly dentures. So naturally, they're doing a lot of extractions for these dentures. So in this case, we looked at his report, and he never submitted, hardly ever submitted a code for a surgical extraction, right?
Sure.
So he did it as a base extraction. So we had asked him, why is that? So the first initial response was, well, I didn't think the insurance company would pay for it. So based on that, we said, no, you did. You mean none of these procedures were ever a surgical extraction, or you never had to trim any bone for this particular extraction? Well, I did, but I didn't think the insurance company would pay for it. So after being educated and say, listen, you're entitled to code appropriately, or you make sure that you submit the proper notes and chart appropriately, and you should get paid for the work that you actually do. So in that particular dentist case, if he goes and he actually practices accordingly and really submits the code that's appropriate, he's going to see about $40,000 in additional revenue for his practice. So again, the coding is a broad topic, and there's a lot of codes to review, but people should just know that to understand which codes are appropriate, how the treatment planning is appropriate, charting is appropriate, and really get paid for the work that you do. And those that need to be educated, we can actually work with them to make sure we guide them in the appropriate way. Hope that answers your question.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny. I know a lot of docs that are just they basically pass the buck on insurance coding. They're just like, the people in the front take care of it. I just tell them what I did. And there's a danger in that, because you don't know the person in the front has, number one, you don't know if they've been told everything that you actually did. They don't know if, whenever you were in there, if you did something in addition to what you had on the treatment plan, just because it had to be done. So they may not be getting billed for it or whatever it may be. Number two, they may not understand these rules either. They may have gotten a question from the insurance company saying, we've denied this claim due to the fact that we don't have any pictures or something like that, or there was the documentation wasn't sent along with it, and they put it in their heads like, well, this is going to be a pain. I'm just going to do the automatic downgrade next time that they gave me. Like, they automatically downgrade it from one thing to another. And so they just say, well, instead of me, getting it denied the next time, I'm just going to file it as is, because that's easier to do, and they're going to downgrade it for me anyways, right? Is what they're
Right.
thinking, even though that may not be the case. So I am saying this to illustrate this to our listeners, that even if you think you're okay in this area, you may not be, because it may be getting taken out of your hands and you not realize it. So yeah, that's
it's a good. I'd say the point is, just in most aspects of our lives, we are biased towards ourselves.
Sure.
Right. So having a third party come in and take the opportunity to review that's unbiased can really enlighten the practitioner, really enlighten the dentist as to, wow, I thought my numbers were higher here, or I thought my numbers were lower. But when you have another pair of eyes look at it to bring it to their attention, plus with some great education and great insights, it can be very productive for them.
Very interesting. Well, you've been a very interesting interview. I could probably pick your brain a little bit more, but I'm afraid I would start saying a bunch of words that I don't actually know the definition to, just because I've heard other people say them at some point in time.
Sure.
So, Harold, you've been great. Is there any other points that you want to discuss as far as common mistakes that dentists make in the world that you're in that you feel is an easily remedied mistake?
I think some common mistakes, or maybe common misconceptions, is that the insurance companies won't negotiate. That's always the first thing.
Sure.
They've been trained to have that response over the years. We've definitely proven them wrong. So we feel that the dentist should be empowered to understand that they are important to the practices, important to the insurance companies. They're not just a number, and we do represent them in that respect. Another common mistake is not updating your UCR regularly. That is very important. It doesn't take a lot of time, and it doesn't take a lot of money to do it correctly, but it's something that dentists often overlook. So I think that's something that is important, and they shouldn't make those mistakes, because it definitely is costly over a period of time. And also the other aspect we talked about earlier about credentialing, understand that if you're in an acquisition phase and you're transitioning to buy a new practice, don't make any assumptions as far as the time frame when it comes to credentialing. Always plan ahead. We often speak to people that put credentialing to the back of the bus, and it really shouldn't be. It's something that the insurance companies do take a serious amount of time to do, and it's something that the dentist can't really control and plan, but what they can control is getting it done early, being proactive. So I can't recommend that strongly enough.
Very good. Well, Harold, again, thank you so much for coming on today. It's been a pleasure. If anyone has any extra questions or wants to reach out, what's a good way for them to be able to be in contact with you?
They get it two ways. You can email me any questions they like, any information they need. I can be of help to them at harold@apexreimbursement.com. That's Harold at APEXREIM, B as in boy, URSEMENT.com. Or they can feel free to call me directly at area code 410-834-3088. And just for some general information, they could always go to our website at apexreimbursement.com.
Fantastic. Well, again, I appreciate you coming on and giving us a little bit of your time today. And I look forward to speaking to you again in the future. It's been a real pleasure.
Great. Thank you so much. Take care.
Thanks, Harold.
Bye-bye.
Very special thanks to Howard for coming on the show, and just making a few tweaks in how you deal with your insurance and negotiations can have a big effect on your practice's bottom line. So as a bonus for today, Harold has shared his 5 steps to negotiating PPO's guide, which is super valuable regardless of if you're a new practice owner or have been around the block a few times. I really suggest you go take a look at it. So to get this bonus, simply text practice to 33444. Again, that's practice to 33444, or visit startyourdentalpractice.com/bonus if you're outside of the US. You'll also receive updates on the latest episodes of Start Your Dental Practice, helpful tips for owning and running a practice, and promotional opportunities direct to your inbox. So that's it for today's episode, but that doesn't mean that the learning and implementation have to stop there. I've created a free report called The 15 Numbers That Will Make or Break Your Dental Practice. This report has been downloaded over 1,000 times by dental professionals. So if you want your free copy of this report that's going to outline what the most important numbers are in any dental practice, and it also includes how to look at your numbers, how to set goals, has a whole slew of really important information that is the culmination of all of my experience as a dental CPA, then just go to startyourdentalpractice.com/free gift. That is startyourdentalpractice.com/free gift. And so that's it for today, Ambitious Dentist. Again, I'm Jonathan Van Horn, CPA and ABV. I'll see you next week with another world-class practice owner or consultants that will help you start your very own dental practice. Thank you guys so much for being a part of the Start Your Dental Practice community. If you enjoyed today's episode, please do me a favor and go to startyourdentalpractice.com/iTunes to leave your honest feedback and review on iTunes. It's going to help me create a better experience, a better show, a better podcast for you, the ambitious dentist. Your feedback really does help, regardless if you like the show today or not. If you didn't like the show, let me know, because it's going to help me create a better show and podcast for you. Lastly, if you know of anybody that would benefit from today's episode and today's content, today's guest, please feel free to share with them on social media or through email.